finally got a Star Wars calendar.
Oh, well done, man.
Dark Side Villains 2025. I only got it in February. I got 12% off for obvious reasons.
Well, that makes sense.
Absolutely. And so can this podcast. Welcome to Making Tracks.
You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me in.
It's been a really good Star Wars week, a very busy Star Wars week.
Yeah.
There seems to be plenty of news flying around. Last weekend was Festival of the Force, which was really, really good. Not been to Newark before. I think the expectation was low because it's a new show. People weren't quite sure what was going to be what. And long story short, it was just on the Saturday. 10 guests were there. Blues Harvest played the stage. YT1300, who are a Star Wars punk band, they played as well. The fans seemed really happy. The costuming groups that were there seemed really busy. Can't call it anything other than a whopping success.
That's great. That's what we want, isn't it? Because, you know, when a new show launches, it's always difficult, especially, I suppose, if the promoters or the event organisers aren't necessarily au fait with Star Wars. It is a little bit of a nervous time. You kind of turn up and it's just going to be just us and maybe 10 people and a dog. You know, it's like... That's good. I'm really happy, actually. It's a shame I missed it. Hopefully, if there's another one, I'll get an invite, as in I being Rebel Legion.
I'm sure you will, mate. I'm sure you will. Fingers crossed there's more to come. But nice people, pleasure to deal with. And yeah, fingers crossed for more. How busy have you been, Mark?
Mate, I've been really busy, but work busy, like super busy. So we were at MegaCon, and it seems one of these things that it could be one of those cursed years where everything's going to clash. We're booked in to do Echo Live as punters, and we're going to the Saturday night meal and stuff.
I'll see you there. Look forward to that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. That's also the same weekend as MegaCon in Birmingham, so I won't be truthing that.
Blimey.
But then, to be honest, that's kind of how it's been, actually. I think every time I've tried to get to Echo Live, it has been a date clash. So I was just like, do you know what? Let's just do it. Let's go up because you've been countless times. My mate Phil Parker's been tens of times, and
Phil's always there. Phil's called Phil for a reason. It's because he fills his car with stuff at Echo Base.
Literally, yeah. He did say that. So he tends to sell on the October one, but he tends to buy in the March one. So he scratches this plastic itch in March, and then he has to make space in October to then allow him to replenish his collection in March.
Sounds about right.
It's a quite nice way of doing it, I suppose.
Yeah, I get that, because I mean, the last one I did a bit of selling. But foolishly, because everyone seems to be letting go of their Black Series at the moment, the thing that I purchased a table to sell at was Black Series. And really, to be honest, I like Echo because there's loads of people there. There's good guests. You can have a mooch around and a catch up and a chat. Spend a few quid buying some interesting stuff. So I was selling at the last one. I think I'll just be mooching and buying bits and bobs at this next one. And doing the meal. First time I've done the meal, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's the same for me as well. So we'll have to catch up. And it means, I guess, we're going to have Making Tracks live from Echo Live, which will be
definitely. We shall walk the floor. There's plenty to talk and see. Yeah. And loads of people there, some good guests as well. Death Star is the topic of this particular. They always have a theme at Echo.
Yeah.
So I think the last one was the Endor, was the Ewoks. This time it's Death Star. So some really good guests there. Look forward to a Making Tracks. There you go. We've just made a decision. Let's do a Making Tracks live at Echo.
Cool. So what's in the news, sir?
In the news is, and this has been by far our most read article on the site for absolutely ages. Q Stark suing Star Wars producers for £190 million. If you saw the original Star Wars, you won't have seen Q Stark in it because she was in the deleted scenes. It's one of those Mandela effect things. People seem to remember seeing her and seeing Biggs. in Tosche Station. They didn't. They read the storybook. You didn't really see any of that until Behind the Magic back in '99, and then other scenes came out on the Blu-ray later on. But Kustark and Anthony Forrest, who we all know Anthony because we've seen him around at shows for years and years. He was Fixer. He was the sand trooper that speaks to Luke and Ben in the land speeder in Mos Eisley. They're suing Lucasfilm for $190 million for profiting off their likeness. Now, what do you make of this, Mark? You know as much as I know that most of the actors, when they signed up for Star Wars, would have signed a clause that gave Lucasfilm the rights to their likeness. Carrie Fisher joked about squeezing open a shampoo bottle and the shampoo comes out the top of her head and all the stuff that Carrie used to say, $1 every time I look in the mirror goes to George Lucas and all that stuff. What do you make of this hopeful claim for Kustark and for Anthony Forrest?
I mean, it's a lot of credits. I suppose if you're a lawyer who's just been approached by Kustark or Anthony Forrest to say, do you fancy having a go at Disney to try and get some money? You'd probably like, yeah, go on, I quite fancy that because their commission will be quite chunky, you'd think. It's an interesting thing because you think studios now are a completely different kettle of fish to really back in the 70s. Star Wars in 76, 77 was really kicking off the whole mega franchise thing, the whole blockbuster, and also, most importantly, the merchandising. I kind of get it. You imagine it was probably a fairly simple, straightforward contract. You'll get paid for the work you do. Unless you're top billed actors, you're not going to see any kind of residuals at any points on the profits. So they must obviously think that they've got a strong case.
Yeah.
The thing is, if Disney settles out of court, that opens the door for every man and his Ewok and Jawa who's ever been in anything to do with Star Wars to kind of suddenly go, cha-ching. My guess would be if it goes to court, then Disney are going to try and shut this down and make this so emphatically overly expensive on both Anthony Forrest and Kustark that nobody else will want to risk doing it because it's a bit of a gamble.
I think there's a number of angles on this. One, they were ultimately in deleted scenes, so they're not in sequences that most people... I asked Ruth when we were talking about what we were going to talk about today. Well, what's your topics for today? Oh, we're going to talk about the Kustark thing. Oh, tell me about that. She didn't know who Kustark was. Oh, she's in a deleted scene from the original Star Wars film. You see more of her character played by a different actress in, I think it's the second episode of Book of Boba Fett. Yeah. Than you see Kustark play that role in A New Hope.
Is that the thing? Because they're talking about their likeness, aren't they? So they're talking about the fact that this other actress has come in who's had to be, I suppose you could say, loosely matched to what Kustark kind of looked like, i.e. you wouldn't maybe go for like a 6 foot tall blonde to play Cammy.
That's a good point.
But I mean, it's Book of Boba Fett, and it's a limited Disney Plus series. How many Cammy and or Fixer action figures are there out there?
It seems like a real stretch. Okay, I interviewed Julian Glover last week. Yeah. And so I had Julian Glover and Guy Henry and asked Guy, tell me about your experiences playing Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One, how tricky and technical it was. And he goes into all the details of what he had to go through with the dots on the face and the cameras on his head and all that stuff. And then turned to Julian and said, you've been asked this a million times before, but can you run through your process for Empire? And he says, well, we were paid £200 a day. We were there for 5 days. We did our stuff. And we went home. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it's basically what he said. And really, the upshot of that is that as a guy that's coming in to do a specific role on the Executioner, and then he does the scenes in the AT-AT. But nevertheless, he films it all fairly quickly, and he's paid his flat rate, and off he goes. Probably signed a bit of paperwork in his contract. Oh, well, we might use your likeness to make toys. I mean, of all the people to be aggrieved, actually think about it, it's Julian Glover, because that Imperial Commander figure that came out...
Is General Viz.
Is General Viz in that outfit, but it's not... It's not named as General Veers. Julian Glover couldn't use that figure. In fact, we were the very first people to show him the Black Series figure version of General Veers. We took it to him at Leicester at the Space Centre, and we walked up to him and showed him the figure. He'd never even seen it. So he would have a legitimate argument there, but savvy enough to know that this is how the game is played.
So a very quick, and I caveat by saying little quick Google search, 2010, Celebration 5 exclusive, Cammy and Fixer comic 2-pack. So you can't really say that they've really been overly done for the likenesses. And to be fair, unless you... Oh, it's a nice custom figure, actually, by somebody. That is of Cammy. That's quite cool. That might be worth buying to get her to sign, just to kind of, rub a bit silver. And yeah, there's not a huge amount. I mean, I was made aware, probably the same as you. I was I was more made aware of Cammy and Fixer through the NPC radio plays.
Absolutely, yes. That whole Tosche Station sequence.
Yeah.
How Deacon Windy and Luke's nickname being Wormy. I mean, how many people? How many people know that? You'd know that from the radio dramas. I think it's maybe in the original Marvel comic, maybe, but I'm not 100% sure from memory. You know, when Behind the Magic came out, we were all excited for Phantom Menace. We start seeing all these cool moments from the special editions had just come out, but we're seeing these cool moments from the original film, and it's just a look inside a doorway that never quite opened in the original film. We see a little bit of Luke's home, sort of home life and friendships and such, and realise where he is on that social Tatooine ladder and all that stuff, which only really bolsters the fact that what he does at the end of the film, blowing up the Death Star, was just magnificent and amazing. You imagine if they'd announced Q Start for Celebration Japan. You imagine the queues for that. Official pics get together, some great photographs. Lucasfilm dive into the archives and they pull all the stuff out. They make a whole thing of it. That would be an absolutely tremendous guest to get at that show. It would educate people that didn't know about the character in the same way that Jenny Creswell, who was Han Solo's girlfriend in the cantina. I mean, I was the first person to interview Jenny for about 20 years back in my early days on Insider to track her down. It was it was fun, but it was a job to find her. Something like that. It's a whole little story. It's a whole little unique thing that's tied to the past. We're racing towards the 50th anniversary. It feels like a crazy time to potentially shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, exactly. You know, Anthony makes appearances at various conventions, doesn't he? So
yeah, he's a good guest.
He's done partnerships with RS Props, unlicensed, but he's done like the Move Along Trooper helmet signed like promotions and stuff like that. So
yeah.
And that's the thing, you kind of go, well, if you start focusing Disney's attention onto stuff like that, how quickly does it all come down? Suddenly, like Julian Glover is getting a cease and desist for signing. You kind of wonder actually if maybe there's a bigger knock-on effect that might actually impact the community in ways that actually we're not aware of. If it makes it to court.
Mark, if they do win this case, Q Stark and Anthony Forrest were always my favourite Star Wars actors. Just to say,
yeah. I was going to say absolutely. Yeah. I literally cannot think of two more favourite characters than
Agreed.
Cammy and Fixer, and we should get them on the show.
We should get them on the show. Absolutely. At Star Wars Fan Fun Day, I never got to interview Anthony because he was always busy when I went to his table.
Yeah.
And Q, I've been chasing, literally, not physically, but literally, metaphorically, for an interview since I did that Jenny Creswell piece in 2010. So I've been chasing her as an interview for 15 years. So yes, if we can get them on the show, that'd be amazing. I'm not holding my breath, but that's another story.
And also, I don't want it to cost us $190 million.
Hi, this is Alexander Freed, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks.
So Harrison Ford, he's having an amazing time in his career right now. He's starring in Shrinking on Apple Plus. He's starring in 1923 on Paramount Plus. He's about to star as the President of the United States in Captain America: Brave New World. But talking about the future, and in respect to the future, we're talking about the look of Harrison Ford. He talks about work that was done in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Troy Baker played Indiana Jones in that. And Ford said about that performance, "You don't need artificial intelligence to steal my soul. You can already do it for nickels and dimes with good ideas and talent." He, Troy Baker, did a brilliant job, and it didn't take AI to do it. So very interesting that he makes a point of putting the onus on the performance when not that many years ago, he himself had said, and I think Kathleen Kennedy supported what he said, nobody else can play Indiana Jones. And then I think the interesting line that probably the meat and bones of what we're going to talk about. He says, "My plan is to keep working behind that face till I don't care what happens anymore. There won't be any need for me. There's somebody behind me doing what I did." To me, that reads like Harrison has probably signed some sort of deal with somebody somewhere to allow technology to keep the visage, the mask, the face of Harrison Ford, at whatever age it might be, alive, waggling the air quotes, to be Indy or to be Han Solo. Doesn't say whether he means on television or film or whether he means uniquely in computer games. That's not said. But as technology moves forward, you'll assume that that tech will facilitate whatever high quality you might want or need. Mark, do you think Harrison has sort of brokered some sort of deal to allow his face to be used going forward after he's not around or even whilst he's around, bolstering the performance like he did in Dial of Destiny? Is that how it reads to you? It's certainly how that reads to me.
I mean, I took it that, if he's fair to help the creative process, then actually you can have somebody do the performance and then merge two to the point whereby you blend it then there's no need to have Harrison Ford. So once you get all the kind of performance data that you need, a bit like with what they did with Mark Hamill in Mandalorian, he's there and he's obviously offering the voice to an extent, but then the actual performance by somebody else. This kind of feels like he's kind of like saying, well, actually, you don't need me. We've got somebody else who's kind of actually playing the role, and we're just swapping the face out. So it comes down to a point whereby maybe he is gonna take a step back and then just let the technology kind of take over. And that is Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is Harrison Ford and vice versa. Therefore, any likenesses going forward will be that. How that will sit if we were to do a movie and the cost of that, and actually how like realistic it is. Obviously, technology is only getting better. Time will only tell. And then you could end up with almost a Mandalorian kind of situation where you might have 2 or 3 different people playing Indiana Jones, but it's kind of just the voice of Harrison Ford, be it actually Harrison Ford or through a re-speecher type AI application that is doing the performance. If it means that we continue to get more Indiana Jones adventures, be it on the big screen, little screen, or on the computer game screen, then I'm all for it.
Every element of what you said, the re-speecher stuff and all the other things, that's a technical process. That's not the soul of the performance.
No.
I'll cast back to Festival of the Force last week, speaking to Brian Herring and Dave Chapman about puppetry and performance. You can build the greatest puppet, you can build the greatest mechanics, the greatest everything that you could need. It can be the most lifelike looking thing. But if you are not a skilled enough puppeteer or performer to imbue that character, that puppet or whatever you want to call it, with the soul that you need to make it feel real, it's going to look like plastic and wood and mechanics and whatever. To me, I think Ford's saying, hey, he's not naming them, you've just named them, all the constituent elements that will be required to make this thing happen going forward, to have the face of Harrison Ford still be the face of, let's say in this instance, he's talking about Great Circle, Indiana Jones. I like that in the sense that it relegates the technology to being like, not to denigrate actual makeup work or actual prop work or anything else, but it's just another tool. It's another aspect of the toolbox that you would need to make a film. And he says nickels and dimes, talent and performance, good ideas and talent. He's now putting the onus on the performers. Troy Baker or whoever it would be is doing, waggle the air quotes, a Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones or a Harrison Ford as Han Solo or whatever. But it's very much like you just said, Mando is now at least 3 people, if not more. Oh, it's more if you include Pedro Pascal. You've got the 3 guys in the suit and him. Vader was always a collaborative effort. R2's a collaborative effort. You got Kenny in the droid, and you got people, rolling around with remote control ones and yada, yada, yada. So they're all collaborative efforts. Instead of it just being Harrison Ford bringing the whole package to the stage, it would be other performers. There is a Wall Street Journal interview, actually, it's gone on Fantha over the last day or so, where he says, the question is, what's next for you in the future? And he basically says, less work. I want to fly more. I want to spend more time with my family. He's on a hot streak at the moment, for sure, but I don't think he's thinking years and years in the future. He's taking these things as they come, because he ain't getting any younger. He's 83 this year, and he's in great health, but he's not Benjamin Button. So it's a smart thing to be thinking of, I'm going to dial this back a little bit. I'm going to wind this down a little bit. But he's aware that Lucasfilm going to want to do more indie, more Han Solo stuff.
Exactly. And I suppose the difference is like when he was, him and Kathleen Kennedy were saying Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones. I mean, how long ago was that?
A few years, wasn't it?
Exactly, a few years. This week I didn't celebrate because I didn't notice it until today. It's my 20th anniversary at Sky. I've done 20 years. And so I've got at least another 27 years in front of me, potentially working before I can retire, unless my numbers come in. You kind of wonder, like, how long can you do this for? How long can you continue to do this at a certain level, put out same high level of quality performance as you always have done? And then the last thing you want to do is get to that point where actually we kind of see more with rock bands and stuff where they've just done one tour too many. They should have called it on the last album. Leave them wanting more. Leave them with images of like a strong, well-rounded performance rather than actually something that's a little bit weak, a little bit frail, a little bit doddery. This is the first time in human history where we've kind of had these, alter egos where we want to tell more stories. It's not just through word of mouth. It's not just through the printed word and the printed medium, which is easy to then pass on to a different author and for them to continue with stories. But we've got visual references. And I think like we all look at stuff and we compare stuff. It doesn't matter if it's like me looking back at photos from me 6 months ago or me looking back at James Bond films from 30 or 40 years ago. You have these references. And so like, then when the next one comes out, that's what you're comparing it to. And I think that is something that the creative industry need to come to terms with the fact that if they want to keep these mega franchises evergreen, Star Wars, Marvel, all that, they have to find ways to keep the continuity of the characters continuing without there being like a drop in quality.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Sticking with Harrison Ford, as people will know, he will star as President Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, aka Red Hulk, in Captain America Brave New World. Opens this coming weekend. Another franchise that he will dive into with relish. He's very much looking forward to it, but he was asked, when he was talking about Cap, he was asked about the last outing, his fifth outing, or sixth if you count that young Indiana Jones episode, outing as Indiana Jones. And he had this to say. He said, "Shit happens. I was the one who felt there was another story to tell. When he had suffered the consequences of the life that he had to live, I wanted one more chance to pick him up, shake the dust off his ass, and stick him out there, bereft of some of his vigour, to see what happened. I'm still happy that I made that movie." It's very brave, really, for him to say that. The film didn't connect with audiences, sadly. I think it's probably had a better life on Disney Plus than it did at the box office. For whatever reason, it got kind of review bombed. It's something we see a lot in and around Lucasfilm projects, sadly. We've certainly had it in 2024 with The Acolyte being review bombed. It was getting great reviews from the critics, review bombed to hell from the fans. Do you think in retrospect it was right for him to come back and give Indy a last go? Or do you think maybe, as you kind of said in the last piece, that sometimes to make the rock band analogy, it's just better to go out on a high than come back for one more tour and kind of tarnish the legacy? Not that Dial of Destiny was in any way tarnishing the legacy.
Well, I really enjoyed Dial of Destiny. Maybe it's because I'm not like a huge like Indiana Jones fan. So I just kind of went in there. I watched it. I wasn't overly critical about the whole thing, and then I just enjoyed what I saw. Obviously, there's some franchises and some shows that we're more critical about than others. But I really liked actually what they did with that kind of flashback to the World War II stuff. Did make me really wish that we could see more of that era, of that age of Indiana Jones. Sometimes when you have these actors, who've embodied these characters for such a long period of time, I think it's nice to let it go out on a bit of a high note, let them kind of like wander off into the sunset, which I guess they kind of did in Crystal Skull, really, to be fair. But I think this one felt like more of a personal ending to the character, which I'm sure brought Harrison Ford back to the film one more time, because he definitely don't need the money.
No, he definitely don't need the money. And I think it's a recurring theme, really, in more recent films. Certainly, if you watch Shrinking on Apple Plus, which I've just finished season 2, the topic of age, it seems to be very foremost in Ford's mind as an actor.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid to show Indy as an older guy, the aches and pains. And, I know Indy's about 10 years younger than he is. His character Paul in Shrinking is about 10 years younger than Harrison is. They actually say his age is early 70s, whereas Harrison's early 80s, which to me felt like a nod to Indy. Yeah, I think he made the right decision to do Indiana again. I think the juxtaposition between Indy at that age, actually far older than Henry was in Last Crusade. When you look at Last Crusade, it's almost like, how old's Harrison Ford now? He's nearly 50. My God, he should be wrapping it up. You as a Bond fan knows this better than anyone. You look at Roger Moore in the last couple of Bond films, and he does look like the furniture's just come to life and started acting, because he had aged so much, from when you saw him in Man with the Golden Gun. Right, that was his first one, wasn't it? Was that
No,
his
Live
first
and Let
one?
Die.
Live and Let Die, there you go. So you see him in Live and Let Die, and then you see him in, was it View to a Kill?
Yeah.
Yeah, the difference, it's only, 12 years difference? 73 to 85, something like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so 12 years, but he visibly aged a heck of a lot. So he was definitely right to move on out. Whereas Indy, nothing to compare Indy to, just felt like that was the way that things were back then. So for him to come back for Dial of Destiny and not only give us a cracking adventure with that wonderful flashback scene to 1944, I think it was from memory, which was amazing. I also think on a previous topic earlier in the show that we talked about Ford allowing his visage and his face to be used in future projects. I would imagine that what they did in Dial of Destiny, actually literally using footage from earlier films in the Lucasfilm archive that allowed them to build up this version of Indy that could be, how old was it? When was Indy born? 1899. So it would have been 45 in Dial of Destiny. To do a 45-year-old Harrison Ford performed by an 80-year-old Harrison Ford must have absolutely intrigued him.
Yeah.
Just must have blown his mind. Not that he ever gives anything away or get that overly excited about anything. But I just feel like that maybe was the precursor to him having this thought process of, I could still be out there, kind of, even when I'm not around.
Do you know what? That's exactly what I was thinking. If they hadn't have done Dial of Destiny and they just jumped straight to the computer game, would he have brought in? But having kind of had that intermediate process where he's doing lots of performance and they're using archive stuff as reference material, makes it a softer entry into this newfangled tech.
My name is Dean Charles Chapman, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So, another actor that's almost as greedy as Harrison Ford in scooping up franchises and IP, Sigourney Weaver. She's already been in the Alien franchise, Ghostbusters, Avatar, the highest grossing movie ever. Now, she's joining the Star Wars galaxy in The Mandalorian and Grogu. She's rumoured to be playing a New Republic colonel, and she's very much looking forward to it because, as she says, she gets to star alongside a little badass, and she's talking about Grogu. She said, I get to have scenes with a little Grogu, which is probably why I did the movie. And he's a little badass too. It's going to be wonderful for people to see what Grogu is up to now because, and this is important, he's grown up a little bit and is capable of much more than maybe we think just watching the series. I play a wonderful character who is in a position of authority, and I have to send the Mandalorian out on a mission to the Outer Rim where all the bad stuff happens. I admire it, but I don't sit around wishing I was in another franchise. She's talking about Star Wars now, because I've been so lucky to be in some wonderful ones. But at the time when I was offered it, I was delighted. I'm a great fan of Jon Favreau. I was already a great fan of The Mandalorian. So, quite a bit to pick out of that there, Mark. I think she's looking forward to being in Star Wars. She's looking forward to acting with Grogu. And she's playing a New Republic colonel. What do you make of all that?
So she's basically the M who's going to send Mando off on his mission. That's what I took from that.
That's a great analogy, actually. I didn't consider it that way. Yeah, that's a good point.
I also wonder how much she was allowed to say on that, because you kind of wonder, like, she's been a little bit slightly more, I guess you say, forthcoming with details than we've really had from a Mandoverse, really, haven't we? And they've all been fairly tight-lipped. However, she said it, so we run with it. I did start to wonder by the end of season 3 of Mandalorian, is there going to be a bit of a jump, either in the film or like the next series? And is Grogu going to grow up a little bit? Because, yeah, okay, he's cute, but he can't stay cute forever. And maybe actually if he's bigger, he gets a little bit more autonomy without, a shell off IG-11 to use. It might make him a little bit more of a character that can stand literally on his own 2 feet without it jumping the shark a little bit. I'm thinking like the end couple of scenes from the last episode of season 3, when he's trying to evade those Praetorian guards and stuff like that, it kind of felt a little bit like Yoda in Attack of the Clones, jumping around and stuff like that. And there's only so much of that I think you can kind of legitimately get away with. I wonder how much older he's grown, because obviously this is the nice thing about his species is that they can probably make up the rules as they're going along. And I'm sure they are, because there's no reference other than he's about 50. And we know how big Yoda was when he was 900 years old. He doesn't really have much growing to do in the grand scheme of things, but you would kind of think he must get to kind of a point where he can be a little bit more autonomous like that. Maybe not necessarily need to be picked up all the time.
You're right. We only ever saw Yoda. I mean, we've gone back in the High Republic, so we've gone back, a couple of hundred years, and Yoda's around in that, and we've seen him do things in there. So, but it does make you wonder how these growth spurts would work for a creature that could potentially live for a millennia, like Yoda, his species, whatever that species is called. We know there's characters out there like Maz, who's supposed to be like 1,000 years old, isn't she, Maz?
Yeah.
So there's characters out there that are just like tortoises that just live forever. But nevertheless, I think it's very interesting, one, that she's playing a New Republic character, and two, like you say, she says he's grown up. What does that tell us? I don't foresee a teenage Groot scenario. That's not where I think this goes.
No.
But, if he's getting a bit more confident in his powers, I would imagine he's speaking. I still think back to season 3 when Christopher Lloyd was announced, and I was convinced Christopher Lloyd was going to be the voice of Grogu.
When you say grown up, maybe he's a little bit more mature, not necessarily in size, but actually in his, how he handles his powers and stuff like that. He's, maybe been able to reawaken more of what he remembers from his time on Coruscant. Maybe he's had more interaction with Luke Skywalker.
I mean, also Yoda, I think they've established, because we saw Yaddle, and Yaddle, Bryce Dallas Howard, just kind of talks normally, not like Yoda, not sort of speaking half sentences backwards and such. It feels like that was a Yoda thing. I wonder whether that was just a cultural thing, because Yoda was older than Yaddle, or whether it was a geographical thing. Will Grogu speak like that? It depends on which way they want to go with it. I could just see Frank Oz doing Grogu, but not doing it in the Yoda speak, just doing it in the Yoda voice, but not the riddle type speaking that Yoda does.
Yeah, I kind of almost thought that was slightly I don't know, maybe just had a knock on the head when he was younger. It is one of those weird things because, like, up until we see him in Phantom Menace, you kind of put him down to, oh, maybe it's because he's just been on this planet by himself and the only person he's talked to is himself. But then it's like, no, that's how you've always spoken. How does that work? If you dramatically change what the character is, do you make it better or not? It's like if suddenly R2-D2 could properly speak. Sometimes the beauty is just not knowing exactly what he's kind of saying, and you just get it from the tone. You think back to when we were looking at season 1 of Mandalorian, and really everybody was just referring to him as a baby or Baby Yoda. Well, he's not a baby. He's 50 odd years old. So he's going to start hopefully using his big boy words at some point or another, and at least just saying a few words. How it sounds, I don't know.
Given that Sigourney Weaver has said he's grown up a bit now, it denotes that we've moved down the timeline. I know when we saw the trailer, you see the Razor Crest, you see him with his amber rifle. I certainly said, I wonder whether or not this film is set ahead of season 3, or whether it actually goes back to before the Razor Crest was destroyed in season 2. Maybe there's flashbacks.
I was going to wonder and say maybe there's a threat from Mandalorian's past comes back to haunt him, pre-season 1 type stuff.
And we could hop a decent chunk of time ahead then, couldn't we, given that?
Yeah, exactly. Just jump around. Could be interesting to maybe go, right, let's see a little bit more of very early post-Empire and New Republic infancy through Mandalorian's eyes, and then the main story is pushed a significant amount of time that makes it easier for people to kind of go, oh yeah, well, of course he's going to grow up a little bit.
Hi, this is Dorian Kinji, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
We go and see Mandalorian Grogu next May 22nd. Fingers crossed, stars align, we're at the premiere. You're trooping wearing your lovely orange jumpsuit. I'm there with a microphone in my hand trying to get interviews. We all go in and we sit down and we watch the film. And we find out that Mandalorian Grogu is set 10 years on from the events of season 3 and season 1 Ahsoka. Would that surprise you? Would that intrigue you? Do you think it's going to be a couple of years on because of Grogu's age? Because it would be such a, you would imagine, slow, incremental development. You read comics, Yoda comics, and it feels like even Yoda has to experience the same lessons multiple times before it sinks in sometimes. Just because, and he's wise through repetition, not necessarily because he's wise through wisdom, if that makes sense. So I just wonder how far out they would want to take it. And also as a knock-on effect of that, we know from experience over the last 5, pushing 6 years, that Mando chunk of time that Favreau and Filoni have been given to tell their stories in, nothing else happens in that time period. There's no Mando comics, there's no Ahsoka spin-off comics. It's that you see on Disney Plus, and that's really it. It's adaptations, but nothing more. If they stretch out that time period even further, presumably staking a claim on that, that's a massive chunk of time that's off limits to everybody else.
That is the downtime. I mean, the actual time jump is no big issue, really. When you think about it, we had 10 years between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. I suppose the DNA of the prequel trilogy, you kind of expected there to be time jumps like that. So with this, it kind of makes sense a little bit, because also then if it's all kind of leading to this whole birth of the First Order and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How much can the First Order really do? And maybe people like the Mandalorian find out about when it's maybe 7 or 8 or 9 years after Return of the Jedi, and then nothing happens for the next 20 odd years. How does the New Republic not catch wind of it in that time period? So you move it forward 10 years. The developmental stuff of the First Order can be bigger, for one. But yes, as you say, it does pose a risk. Unless, of course, if they move the Mandalorian forward 10 years, and then they can say, right, in that 10-year period, they can be ancillary Marvel Comics or expanded universe books, which can be bottle episodes where nothing really happens, but it's just a good adventure. Then it's safe. It could be done. I mean, I suppose it all depends, doesn't it? Like, really what they're thinking. And maybe the reason why they were so Clone Wars George Lucas about it was the fact that they're like, they don't really know what they want to do with it. So therefore, they didn't want somebody kind of coming in and then maybe putting something in place that is going to then cause some retcon issues later on. Try and keep it clean, keep it clean until we know what we're doing. And then after that point, there might be the opportunity for authors to kind of jump in and kind of flesh out that era a little bit more. Even now, there's no reason in my mind why you couldn't have had a Grief Karga book, a Cara Dune book, a Fennec Shand book in this time period without it ever impacted anything to do with the main Mando plot.
I wrote for Star Wars Encyclopedia, and one of the articles that I did was about Cara Dune, and it was fascinating, and there was a real story there. And of course, real life impacted that with everything that happened with
Yeah.
Gina Carano. But there was a story there to be told. There's Cara, as you've just said, and Grief Karga, definitely. There's a history between him and Mando. He ends up head of that area of the Bounty Hunters Guild and then takes over on Navarro. What a greater tribute to Carl Weathers than to tell a really interesting Grief Karga story in a novel written by whoever. So you're right, yeah, and they wouldn't impact on what we see in the show. It's all set before.
Exactly. Between Phantom and Attack of Clones and Attack of Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and even like in between each of like the sequel trilogy, they kind of cram as much content as they can in there, which therefore means that everything's kind of been told in that era. So actually, maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing to just kind of leave these little pockets open to maybe revisit later on when you suddenly an incidental character suddenly has decided, the writers have decided, actually, hang on a sec, that one dude is really cool. He's going to have his own series, or she's going to helm her own film. Therefore, now we can go back and tell the story because actually we haven't suddenly just used all the real estate and tied everybody up in knots by cramming it too early.
And that makes all the sense, actually, because we've just had those great books come out last year, Glass Abyss, Living Force, looking back to the Phantom era for the 25th anniversary of Phantom Menace. This year is the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith. You've got Alexander Freed's Mask of Fear coming out, part of the Reign of the Empire trilogy. To what you've just said, you've left it's a very significant story that we're finally getting to. How they could do a West Wing Star Wars story about the rise of Palpatine, or the rise, not in the same way, but, the ascension of Mon Mothma, or Bail Organa, or whoever. The stories are there to tell. Now, in this new trilogy, you're going to get to see that from certain points of view. So leaving those gaps, as you just described, does make sense, because even though I think once we get past the 50th, we're not going to celebrate anniversaries in quite the same way. I know that on Fantha, for example, in 2030, which sounds like a million years away, but it's actually only 5 years away, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back, and many, many other sites will as well. I can't believe that licensees won't do that, like we've celebrated the 40th of Empire and the 40th of Jedi and everything else that we've done. So those moments are still going to be recognised, maybe not to the degree that Star Wars 50th is, because Star Wars 50th celebrates all Star Wars. You're celebrating the comic that came out the week before May 25th, 2027, as much as you are A New Hope, or even the novel coming out in November 76. I mean, the whole history of Star Wars, you're celebrating the whole lot of it. So I think you're right. I think leaving these little pockets is probably quite wise, and allowing Favreau and Filoni to tell their stories in whatever fashion they need to or want to. And again, I'll go back to Mando and Grogu. It does feel like that film could have flashback moments, leaping forward, a bit of a mishmash of sort of styles. And quite apart from the fact we've got Sigourney Weaver in it, who's always a massive tick in the box for quality, isn't she?
Yeah, it's fantastic to have Sigourney Weaver in Star Wars. And maybe this is one of these characters that actually can be returning in various different series or films, little bit party type things and cameos, which would be quite fun. It'd be quite nice to kind of tie it in. Maybe that's one of the deals she's got, is that actually it's maybe an open-ended agreement.
A thought occurs, Mark, literally as you say that. Do you think there's the possibility this is the backdoor pilot to that Rangers of the New Republic series? Because if she's the M, as you describe, sending Mando, who at the end of season 3 basically becomes a New Republic Ranger, do you think this could open the door to a future for that timeline? Because we never got the show we thought we were going to get those years ago.
Yeah.
But maybe this is the way you do it.
And actually, Mandalorian season 4 is suddenly retitled Star Wars Rangers of the New Republic.
Mic drop.
I think it's time for us to call a close to the end of this episode, which actually I don't even know if we said what number this is. What is this?
216, Mark.
An end to episode 216. So thank you very much for joining us, and make sure you come back and listen to all the amazing Fantha Tracks stuff that is coming this week. And also, if you have a listener's question or theory, how you can send them in is Mr. Mark Newbold.
Bit of joy as always. We had no Good Morning Tatooine this week because poor Brian was feeling grotty, but hopefully he'll be back next week. Tune in on Friday for Cannon Fodder with Alexander Freed. But until then, this is how you can get in touch.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show, Good Morning Tatooine, goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
And that's me done for this episode.
Excellent. And as a nice, polite reminder, just remember all the content for Fantha Tracks is absolutely free. You don't have to pay a dime. There's no Patreon subscription, no OnlyFans trial, or anything like that you need to subscribe to. It's all there.
Come on, be fair. It's only Fanthas. Get it right.
That's true. It is only Fanthas. Thank you very much for listening once again. Join us again next week. Stay safe, take care, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Cannon Fodder.